Hey YouTube, and welcome back to Love for Crypto. So we've got a really juicy video for you today. It's a summary video of the Bank of England. They had a live conference yesterday with board members from the Bank of England, the central bank. And it was to do with the future of money. It was summarised from 2018 and what to expect moving forwards into 2019. I actually did submit a question on Twitter a couple of days ago, which fortunately enough was the only Twitter question that actually got read out during this conference, which, as you can imagine, we was over the moon about. You can see it up here. Bank of England's Governor Mark Carney answering a direct question from Love for Crypto during the Future of Money Live conference. Will UK commercial banks be able to hold digital assets on their balance sheets in 2019? And the answer was yes. Now, obviously, this live event, we have got the full video on our YouTube channel, but what we've done is we've took out all the juicy bits and made it into one whole video. It's on for around 25-30 minutes, and I'm just going to do a little bit of commentating over the top of the video. I'll be pausing it at little brief moments because these central bankers speak in code, and the evidence could not be clearer in regards to what they're actually going on about. So I'm obviously going to be interpreting my input during this, but we'll crack straight on with all the juicy bits from the future of money. This is from our policymakers in the UK and their vision and sort of direction they are leading towards moving into the future. So we'll jump straight into it.
I'll start, which is, I think, Daniel, that's exactly right. It rises to a level well above us, which is determining people's right to privacy. I mean, and this is one of the issues, as you're anticipating, with a fully digital economy, digital financial system, in that, in the end, everything can potentially be traceable, including many of the crypto and other innovations in the end are have a chain to them and discoverable. So those are much bigger political questions, and it is a question, if I can add to it, which is around a very speculative issue at this stage in terms of technology, and I'm not sending any signal around this, but in terms of sometimes what's debated is around a so-called central bank digital currency. So could everyone have, could we have our own tokenized currency, which is an analog to a crypto currency, but actually backed by the central bank and the institutions? Or alternatively, could everyone have an account at the Bank of England and transactions would be ledgered through the Bank of England? In both cases, there are many issues related to that, including that actually some of the innovations we're going to talk about later and where they lead, private innovations and where they lead, could be much more efficient and effective ways of accomplishing the same ultimate objective. But one of the issues is around, it seems to me at least, would be around privacy and the information that would be held, and the ability to ring fence that information appropriately, consistent with the traditions and the Constitution of this country. So I'm going to hand back to you, Ben, but I'll make one other point, which was one of the bigger decisions that needs to be made over the course of several years is around digital identification and the forms of digital identification that people and companies will use. Again, back to Daniel's question, there are issues around privacy, property rights, others. There's a long tradition of debate in this country, I know, in terms of identity cards and other issues. But unlocking a lot of the opportunities and protections and giving some of the protections in terms of a digital financial system, much of that would be founded on having a consistent and comprehensive digital identification. It's not a decision, obviously, for the bank. It's a much broader decision, needs to be very carefully thought through and debated. But that, and part and parcel of that, can be some of the education that would be needed. And as you say, Sabrina, given the pace of change, these issues become more and more important. Whether Joe gets a loan for a new business, and Sam doesn't, or both do, or not. And that's and it's not just one commercial bank, it's a series of banks and building societies, and now, and that's why I'm going to turn to Dave, fintech companies, new types of companies who have different ways of making those determinations. And what that leads to is a more dynamic, resilient economy than, again, because the other alternative, if it were only just the nation's money being distributed by the Bank of England, which, by the way, is another risk with central bank digital currencies, because it could lead us down that path. I think the pitfalls of that system are obvious. Can I go to Dave, if I may, and then we can circle back on this. Thanks. So, new topic, but very much related.
New, but very much related.
Yeah.
So, but just perhaps slightly different framing for the next 20 minutes. But hopefully, it will enable us to continue very much the conversations that we've already started. So, I want to move us on to the banking for the new world part of the future forum and fintech. Fintech is the buzzword, but financial technology has been with us for decades. We've been talking about, when you could only get money over the counter, then checks, ATMs, contactless, more and more digital. And I think what's striking and why it is now the focus is the pace of change is speeding up, which is why already we've been talking about these issues around inclusion, around protection, but also around the diversity of provision of financial services to try and improve outcomes. Because the pace is speeding up, the dynamics are that much quicker, and we need to think through the implications. That's why fintech is one of the bank's 7 strategic priorities for 2019. And for what I'm going to do is say just a little bit about our strategy based around 3 E's, and then I'm going to hand over to Tom Mutton, who's sitting down there. Tom is our director of our FinTech Hub, who's going to say a bit more about what the bank is doing in this space to set up a further conversation, which Ramblings of a Bard may want to come back in on. I know Sabila has been thinking about a lot of these issues, so I'll turn to them. But so really what we're doing in a nutshell is we're trying to empower, we're embracing fintech. That's the first E. Empowering providers of financial services and enabling new technologies and new approaches in the process. And really the embracing, we think we need to embrace fintech because it is important to deliver our mission for monetary and financial stability, as Mark was just emphasising. I mean, the Monetary Policy Committee has at its heart the value of money, the stability of money through the inflation target, and fintech could change the UK's economy's performance over time in profound ways in terms of productivity and consumer outcomes, business outcomes. Also, more immediately through as we've just been discussing, how monetary creation works, the transmission of monetary policy and so monetary stability. Then we've got the financial system as a whole through the work of the Financial Policy Committee. And one thing I should have given a plug. John Cunliffe, who couldn't be here today, one of the other deputy governor, Tom Mutton at Ratizzo, Ratizzo Starkey did a fantastic podcast at the end of last week that talks about these financial stability issues, for example, around cryptocurrencies that the FPC looked at. But then there are real benefits potentially from a more, as Mark was just saying, around a more diversified system where risks may get distributed more around the system rather than be concentrated. And then there's Sam's responsibilities for the safety and soundness of individual firms and through the Prudential Regulation Authority and Committee. And there, for those firms, banks, building societies, insurance companies, need to think about in the future whether it would make sense to regulate firms or whether we're going to have to start thinking more about regulating activities and the approach there. So that's really embracing. Empowering is, as we've been discussing already, trying to make sure that we support competition, make sure that these new financial service providers have proportionate supervision and that we're not putting in barriers to their access to the systems that they need to operate in the financial system. And that includes our systems here in the bank, which is the third E, enable. And what we're doing, actually through our direct actions, Mark mentioned this in his opening remarks, we're trying to work on the underlying infrastructure that supports the whole UK financial system, the whole UK payment system, the RTGS system. We were the first bank in the G20 that enabled non-bank payment service providers to have access to it. But this really important issue of data standards that we've been...
Just a quick one, ladies and gentlemen. It does actually go to show how far ahead of the game that the Bank of England actually are. As he has just stated there, the Bank of England are the first G20 country to allow the private sector access to their RTGS system. Now again, Ripple, 2017, the proof of concept with the Interledger protocol actually access their RTGS system. So they are they are directly referring to Ripple when they say that. But of course, they won't say that.
Talking about already today, the role of data, which I think is really what's driving this exponential change in financial technologies and multi-dimensional change, the use of data. Can we, through our suggestions, our recommendations, our active encouragement of data standards, improve the outcomes for those who are using data, but also really important, think about the privacy and governance of data and people's understanding of their own financial needs in a more data digitally driven economy. So I just wanted to say that as framing. Very quickly, I think Tom will just say a bit more about the specifics of that for the bank, and then I might turn to Sabila for some reactions.
Well, actually, I might just have a bit of a forward look to 2019, actually. So Dave has kind of said what needs to be said about FinTech, I think. But I think 2019 is going to be a really exciting year for FinTech. The hub, which I lead in the bank, is going to keep on working really hard to embrace the potential of FinTech. There's a few things we're going to do in the year which is coming up. So we're going to keep up our research and our proof of concept experiments to explore how we can use FinTech both inside the bank, but also how we can interact with innovators. Our experiments so far have ranged from artificial intelligence through to distributed ledgers. We're going to keep on talking to...
Again, there's that keyword, distributed ledger technologies. I know it's repetitive, but 2017 proof of concept with the Bank of England. I'm sure people who follow this channel have seen all the documentation for that, but if anybody does want it, obviously just drop a comment in the comment section. I'll happily forward onto you the entire proof of concept sort of paperwork from the Bank of England.
Stakeholders and scanning the horizon to keep up with the latest in FinTech. Over the last year or so, we've spoken to over 100 companies. We've presented at more than 30 conferences and events, and we're really keen to keep up the dialogue. And we'll keep on making policy, both at home and internationally, to try and make sure that the conditions exist so that FinTech can achieve the benefits, but to do so in a way which is safe and sustainable. I'm really excited to hear what people have to say today, to hear the discussion and to hear the ideas, so I'll probably leave it there, actually.
You both work through an IOD committee that you chair, thinking about these issues for the UK, but also do a lot of consultancy work, thinking about issues around FinTech's use of data, the needs for inclusion in more emerging markets. So I don't know if you want to pick up any of those issues.
Yes, thanks a lot. I think really we have to start with what is FinTech and how is it changing the paradigm. And I think the examples from emerging economy we can learn a lot from and see how we can apply them to our mature system. The issue I think we have is we're a mature system and we're trying to embrace new changes, and therefore how do you balance a mature system with new changes that are happening, and they're happening very, very fast. And a number of the central banks that we work with in emerging economies, we're looking at how does FinTech improve access to finance. Governor, you originally mentioned about the role that the Bank of England plays with member banks in emerging economies, some of the examples we're seeing is where central banks have said, right, this is the pot of money we're going to lend you for SME finance or MSME finance, and we're going to do it at a preferential rate, but we want you to achieve X% of lending to MSMEs. Now, as a nation, I think a lot of us are SMEs around this table, and access to finance is one key issue. The other dimension I'd like to bring in is the gender parity, particularly within SMEs, and gender parity in trade. And I think that is where digital currency has quite a role to play, because you can link digital currency all the way back to supply chain. And if you think of a woman in Africa who's growing avocados and wants to export them to the UK, and if the UK has a digital currency system which then can communicate and exchange with an international financial system, this woman with avocados has greater parity in the supply chain finance. So I think those are the sorts of issues that we need to be debating and talking about, is what is the role for the Bank of England in this changing world, maintaining what everyone around the world aspires to, maintaining some of that, but at the same time balancing these changes that are coming in. Another dimension I'd like to bring in is the Bank of Nature. And that is actually at zero reserves at the moment, I would say. We take a lot of this for granted. You know, climate change, issues with soil, dumping of soil. So how can there be a climate central platform or exchange created? So these are some of the things that we're talking about around the world. With the IOD hat, we focus very much on future growth horizons, because that is what our members want. And growth is the key to all flourishing economies. And for growth, we are in a mature market, so we look at other markets. And some of the other markets we're looking at, such as India, where there's the other program, which is the Digital Identification Program, which is addressing financial inclusion. It's addressing some of the issues around the elderly. So we look at how we can exchange some of these ideas. And those would be some of the thoughts around what all comes down to, in this world of new shifting paradigms, what is the role for a central bank?
Very good.
Fantastic. We're going to be coming back to a lot of those issues, I think, that you were talking about around sustainability, Sabila, in the next session. But Mark, did you want to?
Yeah, I can. So why don't we talk about climate change and the bank's role in that in the next session, if that's okay? And maybe I can pick up very quickly on SMEs and access to finance, and a very interesting gender parity point, a very important gender parity point. On SMEs, so this is a real issue in the United Kingdom. It happens to be an issue in other economies, but it's a big issue in the United Kingdom. We estimate around half of SMEs do not go to the banks, to the formal financial system to finance. So they have kept themselves out of the system. They expect to be frustrated. They self-finance their activities, and that needs to change. There needs to be greater access to finance for small, medium-sized enterprises, and we do think that, I mean, just as a static point, if I could put it that way, in terms of the status quo, but also dynamically, because we also do think that the nature of commerce, it will increasingly cross-border trade will increasingly have a SME component, which goes in part to your second point. And so the question is what can be done, and what is the potential role of new financial technologies in helping to bridge this gap and actually provide more competition for those who do go to the formal banking system. And so this is within this set of issues we're looking at. at the bank, and that this is if not the top, one of the top three priorities. We think that there are things that we can do with our core infrastructure, our payment system, the way we the data that we will use, and the access to other central bank facilities that can materially change the access to finance of SMEs. Not by us, not directly through us, but creating a
even playing field.
The framework for new SME providers to be very active here. Now, I'm not fully laying out exactly what we're contemplating doing because we want to make sure we have everything lined up. But we do expect to take on some of the lessons and some of the innovations that we have seen in some emerging markets in SME finance, and apply them with the standards and the expectations that be consistent with the UK. So, as a small commercial, I would say watch this space over the course of 2019 for something substantial on that.
I'm just going to pause at that one. Again, people, you want to talk about dot connecting, but watch this space 2019 in regards to allowing SMEs to access maybe the central bank's core infrastructure. I'm not saying it's directly going to be XRP, by the way, at this point, but I think it's a really telling tale in what he has just said in regards of watch this space. We know there's a lot of stuff happening this year with Ripple in regards of actually rolling out XRapid, the utility of XRP. Brad Garnhouse has mentioned he expects banks to actually hold XRP in the balance sheets this year, and Mark Carney is the legend of beating around the bush, indirectly answering questions, but I'll allow him to continue.
The issue, your second point, Sabila, around supply chains, gender parity, and digital currency. I mean, there is a lot in that, and it is anticipating a future that is not yet technically feasible, at least in our judgment, because in order to, the way I interpret it, in order to affect aspects of the supply chain through innovations in money, you do need an effective distributed ledger on scale.
So just a quick one. Again, it's not practically feasible, and it's not because we know, and exactly what it's just said with distributed ledger technology. Again, the Bank of England are a paying confirmed customer of Ripple, and obviously he's now talking about scale, and as we know, it is now only feasible for high volume, small value payments. Now, of course, from one entire through a complete supply chain that will also include high value, low value payments, and that's the part that's not feasible currently with the XRPL. But we all know the direction and the work that's being put into its scalability.
That works. That works in all circumstances. That is efficient. That can support a smart contract, for example, that runs across the supply chain. Take advantage of big data and other aspects. That is conceptually possible, but practically not.
Again, conceptually possible, but practically not. Now, obviously, all you devoted Ripple, XRP followers, you can surely understand what he's saying there. It's conceptually possible, but it's practically not. And it's all down to the scale of the network at the moment. Again, we're only doing low value, high value payments with XRapid, with remittance, with those exotic corridors. But you can see the direction where this is going. Again, this is the governor of the Bank of England. It doesn't get any higher in regards of policymakers in our monetary system in the UK.
And we're really, in terms of distributed ledger technology, and we have run a lot of trials with this. Others have as well. We're not yet at a point where it can effectively work. So we have seen some in trade finance, which is to be commended, and UK private financial institutions doing some of this innovation, but it's still early days. And to have it run all the way through a supply chain is not yet feasible. But we're working, as many others are, towards that possibility. The last point I'll make on it is that this issue, which links both of these SMEs and supply chains, is one of the big things, and one of the other top priorities for the work we're doing on fintech is to get the cost of cross-border payments down substantially. And the cost of cross-border payments can be up to 10 times the cost.
And again, what is Ripple's main purpose? Its only purpose is payments. And again, it's not exactly reading between the lines. He's blatantly telling you at this point exactly what they are focusing on this year coming forwards. I mean, there's been focus in the past. We know that the Bank of England have been in cooperation or dialogue, is probably the best way of putting it, since early 2013, 2012 late. And we've come a long way, but I mean, as you can hear him speaking about it specifically, it's unbelievable to it. It's not that it's unbelievable. Again, it's just confirmations.
The domestic payments, both of those need to come down substantially, but there will always be exchange rate risk with cross-border payments, but there's no real reason why there should be anything like that gap, if any gap at all, between a cross-border payment and a domestic payment. And there's various ways, and we're working with other central banks as one example, to just plug the systems together, if I can put it crudely.
Well, let me put it crudely. He's specifically referring to the Interledger Protocol in plugging the systems together. We know that Interledger Protocol is that global standard that will be adopted and already is being adopted in order for interoperability of all payment systems, whether that's an RTGS of a central bank or whether that's a small payment provider with their capital that they have. It's a way of interacting, whether it's mobile money, whether it's Visa cards, whether it's a debit card, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's a blockchain payment, in order to bridge all these payments together without saying it. He is saying it. It's the Interledger Protocol.
So that we get rid of that, those types of gaps. So these are your questions and your challenges touch on exactly the type of issues we're trying to address.
Anyone else want to come in on these issues? I was going to, Gareth, I don't know if you've got any that are coming in from tweets in this kind of space. We certainly had a lot when we were running the platform on this.
We have plenty. This is one of the areas that certainly generates a lot of interest externally. For example, a question that's just come in from someone called at Love for Crypto 17, which I
motherfuckers on the stage
suspect may give an indication of where they stand on this, but asking whether we think that laws are going to be passed that are going to let banks here be able to hold digital assets on their balance sheets this year. Do we expect that to happen to move things forward?
Sam, do you want to
comment on that? I'm very happy to do that, and I think it illustrates how this whole area, it throws up opportunities and tensions for us as a central bank, and back to what should the role of the central bank be. So crypto is a great example. Don't know if any of you have been out to Korea lately, South Korea I presume, if you have, but they obviously had an enormous issue with crypto, and speaking to our colleagues there, it was actually quite difficult for them to get their arms around. Now here in the UK, the interface between the financial system and crypto assets and crypto technology more widely has not been sufficient to make us think it's a financial stability risk, but it has led me, on behalf of the prudential regulation part of the bank, to write to the banks and say, if you are going to hold it, you need to do it in such and such a way and take some care with it. Because one of the funny things about bank regulation is if it's held in a certain way, they don't have to hold any capital against it, and that's back to the point that Mark was saying before. If you have that in the system, that's a dangerous thing to have. Just while I've got the floor, I wonder if I can very briefly point to one other area of opportunity and tension that we have in this space, which is about the approach we take to new banks. So
can I just stop you there for 1 sec? So just make sure we're answering the question. What you're saying is, which I think is right, is you can hold crypto on balance sheet. It has an economic cost, and it has a responsibility of the bank to satisfy issues such as anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing in terms of the provenance of the Bitcoin or whatever crypto asset is used.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That's directly from our Governor, Bank of England. They oversee regulatory issues over banks to a degree. And, he's just said it himself, banks can hold digital assets over here in the UK at the moment. It makes me laugh. I was spun it off onto Bitcoin. A paid customer of Ripple, not to mention XRP, but you'll never ever hear XRP being dropped in these type of conferences. It will always be backhanded onto Bitcoin because obviously there's a lot bigger forces at play when it actually does come round to XRP, and there's all this stuff that they're speaking about here. If you've been in this space for a while, you can clearly see what they're talking about. But it makes me laugh every time how they mask the entire conversation. It's a true politician answer is a good way of putting it.
And one of the, there's no point dancing around it, one of the uses of these assets, crypto assets, is money laundering and proceeds of crime. Now, it's not the only use, but it is one of the uses. And so that puts a burden on the institution in accepting it to make sure that that chain is satisfied. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, and I judge this response may not satisfy the question of judging from their name.
Well, they can all have a little giggle around the table about that, but I can assure you that overly satisfied my question. The only information who's trying to obtain from the central bank itself, would banks in the UK be able to hold digital assets in 2019? We got a clear answer, which was yes. Now, they obviously, the way Mark Carney spun it off with anti-money laundering and maybe anti-terrorism, of course, they're massive key things that need to be resolved and overwatched correctly as things do progress forwards. But I'm more than happy with that answer, and I think anybody else who's over here living in the UK will be more than happy with that answer. You obviously hear about the issues over in the United States. Is it security? Is it this? Is it that? Is it the other? Well, as you can see, the Bank of England and our approach here in the UK, it's officially now known that banks can hold digital assets on their balance sheets.
Briefly on the new banks thing, I just think it's interesting. I wish I could do a spontaneous Menti poll and ask people around the room how many new banks they think we authorised in the UK in the last 5 years. The actual number is 39, which is quite a lot higher than most people think. And within that, there's a whole range of different sorts of institutions. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do that because of the objectives that we have, which include facilitating competition. But it is, I would say, an outlying approach amongst our colleagues internationally. And when we explain how we've approached this and the way in which we've encouraged new bank entry and the risks that we're choosing to run by having a more open system, it's sometimes regarded as surprising by colleagues with a different approach in other jurisdictions.
But it actually concerns me how much they're in the know about Bitcoin and they're in the know about, let's say, the dark web. Or I had someone that I used to be friends with who used to sell drugs online, and it was all through Bitcoin. He had a little SD card he'd stick into his computer. And I guess for me it was quite a big concern that my generation and the people that I was around were more keyed up on that rather than how they can manage their own finances. So I guess just in terms of the bank facilitating cryptocurrency or whatever, Bitcoin, whatever you want to call it, I think similar to something a friend was saying to me is if when you introduced the internet there wasn't necessarily rules that went with it, and now we have the dark web, cyber abuse, things like that. Yeah. And it's like if there's cryptocurrency, then there needs to be so much rules and regulations and standards there, because otherwise, because you've already got young people taking the opportunity and doing what they will with it. And I just think it's a really, for me, that was probably what came out the most concerning, is just, in my experience, that is a big red flag. And I wouldn't encourage more of it myself, but I understand that it's got a place in where we're going in the future.
Hallelujah. I'd just like to make sure. I'm totally where you are. I made, I thought, fairly clear last year that I personally don't see the value in these crypto assets as currency. They're not going to displace sterling and others. I do see the downsides in terms of their use for illicit activity. They're incredibly environmentally wasteful. Bitcoin uses more power for 7 transactions a day than Visa does.
Again, I'm just going to stop it here. And obviously, if you are a Ripple devoted fan, if you're new to the space, and its digital asset XRP is not actually out there to replace fiat, it's to actually complement it in its transactions. So just to level it out there, we're not actually trying to replace currency. We're actually here to complement it and use XRP as a financial instrument in order for money to move cross borders. And he's instantly, yet again, Mr. Coder fucking talking. Carney spun it over to Bitcoin. He's talking about the mining consumption, the environmental unfriendliness of mining. Systemically, mining, really isn't cut out for the job. But again, a paying Ripple customer, the Bank of England, know exactly the efficiency of XRP. And we're talking, it uses less power than Visa. It's scalable with its consensus, unlike mining. And again, it's just a big fuck off smokescreen. As you can see with Kana, he's clearly purposely not speaking about the positives of XRP. He's not talking about how next generational cryptocurrencies such as XRP have solved that mining issue. And he's well aware of the fact of this. The entire world is. Again, XRP will remain radio silent until it doesn't. We know how broadly it is being implemented across the board. And of course, the world are watching these people when they're speaking. And there is a lot of NDAs set in place where they can't specifically, maybe go on and talk about a digital asset that they've maybe signed a contract to not talk about, for example. But it just makes me laugh every time. Bitcoin, mining, it doesn't apply. None of this applies to XRP.
For 65 thousandths a second, and on and on and on. I mean, it's we do think that as those, if those crypto assets touch the formal financial system, they should be regulated in a similar way. Now, what I do think we think as well is that the other aspects of a crypto asset or cryptocurrency, the idea that it's digital, that it's that it could be, what we haven't jumped to, some of what the demand for, not the illicit, purposes, but the other demand, which is you can have digital money that instantly moves between accounts. So right now, we can all send money to each other in faster payments and all that. That's great. We can use contactless cards. But we can't yet, and we will be able to soon. I can't send money from my account to my smartphone to your smartphone instantaneously everywhere. So Dave, when he's at the pub and forgets his wallet because he's doing the cashless challenge, he should have been able to just jump money from his phone to someone else. And so it's that leg of the system that I think younger people, other people expect. And so we need to get to that phase very quickly.
So guys, obviously that's the video, that's the rundown, that's the main talking points in regards to fintech, digital assets, the future of money. I was obviously overwhelmed in regards to having a question read out. I think it was a well put question. The reason I asked the question, of course, was Brad Garnhouse mentioned that he expects banks this year to hold digital assets on their balance sheets, and it just goes to show that this is the case in regards to UK banks. I'm presuming it will be the same for Japan and other countries that have not got the restrictions and barriers put in position. But again, I think that was a really decent future of money. We had a lot of talk on fintech, digital assets, the way we're moving forwards, and again, we're following this day in day out. It's hard to get new information, but I think there was some really, really, really telling points from inside there, if you want to call it reading between the lines or using the knowledge that you've currently already obtained in this space to be able to actually understand the language and the context that they're using in exactly what they are actually talking about. Again, a lot of this talk is code. You will get a lot of this throughout central banks, especially when cameras run them, especially in live events. There's only so much that they can say in that regards. So obviously, just finishing off on that video, one thing I do want to say is me and Scott have been working probably for the past 3 to 4 weeks in making our new documentary. I put a tweet out of it yesterday. I'll try and find it. It's called Globalisation, the Even Playing Field. We've actually got a lot of clips in there from Mark Carney. So when we do talk about reading between the lines, or this code sort of type of talking that they do actually sort of speaking, they cannot directly basically outright call it for what it is a good way of putting it. But obviously here's the trailer we put on a fair while ago, Globalisation Sealer, 11 Playing Field. It is an epic. It's by far our greatest work, it really is, and I do want to put a little bit of a hype into this video because it definitely deserves it. This is about the way we are moving in the future, where we are going to, the reasons why we've had to take this path, and the evidence which suggests this is the path that we are going down. If you've watched our previous documentaries, this is by far the best one for an eye-opener, overall insight of where we are going. I'm looking so forward to getting this out for the community. Again, if you've liked the video, give it a share, give it a thumbs up, let people know. This is, again, that event was live yesterday. It's fresh news, and nobody's covered it. It's hard to actually get information out there that no one's covered, but we've done it this time with this one. We've even had our question read into it. So thanks and cheers for watching, people.